Hi, my name is Yasmin. My pronouns are she, her, hers, and I am a part of the prevention team here at the care office.
Hi everyone, my name is Madeline Burden. My pronouns are she, her, and hers, and I'm also part of the prevention team at the care office, and I am a proud member of Phi Alpha Delta.
And I am a proud member of Alpha Kappa Psi and Delta Gamma. And welcome to this portion of your BAM webinar for fall 2020. So in this presentation, we are going to be addressing how fraternities and sororities can take part in ending sexual/dating violence and stalking in our campus community and in our community in general. So we are the CARE Office, which stands for Campus Advocacy, Resources, and Education. And we are located in KL 107 when campus is in session. However, we are online right now and we have all of our resources that are still accessible. So we will be talking about different issues that can be triggering, such as sexual assault, harassment, dating and domestic violence, and stalking. So if you need any immediate advocacy services, feel free to contact the Valley Crisis Center 24-hour hotline and our Care Campus advocate, Lena Kano. This is her cell phone number to contact. You can text or call her. She's accessible 9 through 5 on the weekdays. So if you can't access Lena, we have the Valley Crisis Center, their 24-hour hotline, and we will go over later on what these resources offer. So fraternities and sororities can create positive social norms, and this is done by everyone contributing to creating a healthy and supportive Greek community. So we're going to be talking about the ways that we can do that, and I will pass it on to Maddie.
Thank you, Yasmin. So we're just going to start off by learning how to recognize different forms of violence. So we're going to be talking about how to recognize sexual assault, harassment, dating and domestic violence, and stalking. And so the first one that we're going to be going over is sexual assault. And I want to note that the first step in preventing these crimes from happening is knowing what they look like before anyone gets hurt. So we're going to be talking about the different warning signs. And first, I want to define sexual assault. So sexual assault is any kind of unwanted sexual contact with intimate body parts. And a lot of times when we talk about sexual assault, rape comes to mind. And that is included in sexual assault. But sexual assault can also be any kind of unwanted touching, kissing, groping, anything of that sexual nature as well. And actually, in college, most sexual assaults are perpetrated by someone that the survivor knows in a situation of trust. And so there was this researcher named Dr. Lisak, and he studied the warning signs of sexual assault. And he found that the two biggest red flags that a sexual assault is going to occur are alcohol pushing and isolating. So alcohol pushing is basically when someone continues to push alcohol on another person, even though that person has clearly had enough to drink. So this person is intoxicated, they're very inebriated, yet this other person continues to push those substances onto this person. And then isolating is basically when someone maybe takes away a person from the group that they're with at a party, or takes them away from the crowd and really tries to get them alone and put them in a vulnerable position. And so with these two warning signs, we encourage y'all to ask yourselves, why? Why might someone want to push a substance onto another person, even though they've clearly had enough? Or why might someone want to isolate somebody and pull them away from their friends? And unfortunately, as Dr. Lisak found, it's unlikely that it's for a good reason. And as he found, it's most likely because a sexual assault is going to occur. So alcohol pushing and isolating are two big warning signs and red flags of sexual assault that we want y'all to be able to recognize just to make sure that nobody gets hurt. And then moving forward to sexual harassment. So sexual harassment is any unwelcome sexual advances, requests for sexual favors, and other verbal or physical conduct of a sexual nature. And today we're going to be breaking down two different types of sexual harassment. So the first one is quid pro quo, which also means this for that. And this is where submission is made explicitly or implicitly a term or condition of instruction, employment, or participation in other university activity. And so I know that can kind of be a lot, so we do have some examples to break that down for y'all. So say one of your professors assigns an assignment and you're really not sure how to go about it. So you decide to go to your TA's office hours. And you say, hey, TA, can you help me? I'm not really sure how to do this. And your TA says, well, yeah, I'll help you, but only if you go on a date with me. Or I'll help you, but only if you have sex with me. So having to give something in return is quid pro quo and is sexual harassment. And then we also have another form of sexual harassment, known as hostile and intimidating environment. And this is the purpose or effect of unreasonably interfering with an individual's performance or creating an intimidating, hostile, or offensive environment. So say you're in a classroom and somebody that you're taking a class with, so one of your classmates, is making sexual comments about your body. And it's just making you really uncomfortable. Class is no longer a place that you feel safe, or no longer a place that you want to be. And they're really taking away your ability to just have fun and learn. And so that place is no longer somewhere that you feel safe. And so if that's the case, that is also sexual harassment through hostile and intimidating environment. So these are two different types of sexual harassment that we want y'all to just be able to recognize to, again, make sure that nobody gets hurt in our community. And then moving forward to a little fun true or false moment. So we do have some different statements, and we're going to be talking about whether or not they are true or false. So the first one that we have here is sexual assault cannot take place in relationships. It's always consensual. And of course, this one is false. So regardless of the relationship status, if you don't have active and enthusiastic participation, if there's no consent, it is sexual violence and is sexual assault. So again, sexual assault can take place within any relationship. And then our next statement here is nearly 2/3 of college students experience sexual harassment. And unfortunately, this statistic is true. So really putting things into perspective for us. And then moving forward to our third one. So women in sororities are 10% more likely to experience rape than any other college women. And this one is false. It's actually higher. So the statistic, the true one, is 74% rather than 10, so quite a lot higher actually. And then our last statement, a professor asking to get coffee in exchange to receive a grade increase is quid pro quo. And as we just talked about, this one is true. So if a professor is requiring something in return, that is quid pro quo and is sexual harassment. And then moving forward to dating and domestic violence. So what does that look like in college?
So, dating and domestic violence is popularly seen in 3 different forms. And I can let Maddie continue with that if she's able.
Thanks, Yasmin. So the first one is often physical abuse, right? This is something that people commonly think about. And of course, that is part of dating and domestic violence. And that can look like hitting, punching, kicking, slapping, anything of that nature. But it can also be psychological or verbal abuse as well. And so this might look like a partner manipulating or gaslighting another partner, or maybe verbally assaulting them by calling them harmful names. And then there's also one more form of abuse that's commonly overlooked, and that's economic or financial abuse. And actually, in relationships, economic abuse is most prevalent and is almost prevalent in every relationship that consists of dating and domestic violence. And so I want to highlight what that might look like on a college campus. So our CAT cards are basically our ticket to everything on campus. We need our CAT cards to get into our dorm rooms, to print our assignments in the library, to take a CAT truck down into Merced to get all of the necessities that we need. We need it to buy food in the dining halls. And say that you're dating somebody and this person takes away that CAT card. And they're like, oh, you know, like we're always together. I'm just going to go ahead and hold on to this for you. You don't really need that CAT card. I'm just going to carry it and take care of it for you. And so if your partner does that, they're really taking away your economic and financial freedom to do all of those things that I just mentioned. If you don't have your CAT card, you can't even get into your own bedroom. You can't print the things that you need to bring to class with you. And it's really inhibiting all of those things that you need to do in order to succeed on a college campus. And so again, that's often commonly people don't really think about. So this is why we want to highlight the different forms of violence that take place within dating and domestic violence. And also we want to note that these kinds of relationships are all about power and control. So the biggest warning signs that a relationship might become abusive are extreme jealousy and possessiveness. So say your partner is so possessive and jealous that they're treating you like property and not allowing you to see friends or maybe hang out with family members that you haven't seen in a while. These are really big warning signs, and we want to talk about them just to make sure that they don't escalate into these other forms of abuse that we've talked about as well. And as y'all can see here, there's also a cycle of abuse. And this is basically where incidents happen within a relationship where dating and domestic violence is taking place. And y'all can see that it starts with tensions building. So maybe tensions are increasing, maybe the breakdown of communication. So things are starting to go south. And then that escalates into an incident, whether that's verbal, emotional, or physical abuse. So maybe that's a partner verbally assaulting another partner, or maybe that's them hitting somebody, or also that emotional abuse as well, manipulation, gaslighting. But then, as we can see on the cycle, it then goes into reconciliation, excuse me. And that's where maybe the abuser apologizes for the behavior. And they say, you know what, I'm sorry, I didn't mean that. They give excuses. And then the person who is experiencing that harm, they might forgive them. And then that goes into the next stage, which is the calm, right? So that survivor forgives them for the behavior. The incident is forgotten. It's kind of the honeymoon phase all over again. But as we can see here, the cycle of abuse is cyclical, which means that it just continues time after time. So it goes back from having those incidents to that reconciliation, to that calm in the storm, but then it just continues. And each time the circle goes around, the abuse only gets worse and escalates. So this is why it's really important to be able to recognize all of these forms and different warning signs, just to make sure that these forms of violence don't increase and no one experiences dating and domestic violence. And we actually have a video that's going to talk about what love shouldn't be.
And let me know if you can hear it.
I want to be your only guy.
Because I love you, skip class with me. Let's stay in bed today.
Because I love you, I just want to be with you so freaking much. Because I love you.
I waited for you after Chem Lab.
You were walking with Mark?
Because I love you.
You shouldn't be hanging out with that dude.
You should know how dumb that makes me look.
I don't care if she's your lab partner.
Why do you have texts from him?
Because I love you. This number, delete.
Because I love you. This Jason number,
Delete.
And Ben,
Delete.
because I love you, I should smash your phone.
I'll let you give me your password instead. Because I love you.
I will check your texts every day.
You got lucky. Because I love you.
Because I love you.
You think it's okay.
Because I love you. You understand.
Because I love you, you stop talking to your classmates. And you feel completely alone.
Because I love you. That's not love.
Great. So as we just saw, that video gave lots of different examples about what love shouldn't be and why it's so important to recognize when a behavior is really not about love, but about power and control, like we mentioned. So we encourage y'all to have conversations about these things with your family members, maybe some friends, or just the people that are around you in your life, just because it's really important that we do create a culture that doesn't normalize these forms of violence. And then going back to our little interactive portions, a little true or false. So we do have some more statements for y'all. So this one says, domestic violence happens only in some communities. And of course, this one is false. Domestic violence impacts and takes place in every community, regardless of how someone identifies. And that does go both ways. So anyone can be a survivor of dating and domestic violence, as well as a perpetrator. And our next one, the most dangerous time for a survivor of domestic violence is after the first incident. And so this one is false. As I mentioned earlier, with the cycle of abuse, it worsens over time. So there's that honeymoon period, and then there's that incident, and it just kind of continues. And each time that cycle goes around, it does escalate. Next one, most abusers have experienced domestic violence growing up. And as y'all just saw, this one is false. So it's more about power and control rather than what they've experienced. But witnessing violence does increase the odds. So yes. And then our next one says, 1 in 7 men older than the age of 18 are survivors of dating violence. And this one is true. So according to the National Intimidate Partner and Sexual Violence Survey, it indicates that 13.8% of men have been victims of severe physical violence by a partner. So men are also survivors of dating and domestic violence as well, and that's something that we do want to emphasize. And then our last form of violence that we're going to be addressing today is stalking. And stalking is a pattern of unwanted behavior that creates fear in the person who's being stalked. And a lot of times when we talk about stalking, these ideas come to mind, and that might be, I don't know, some creepy person maybe hiding in the bushes with binoculars. And while that can be stalking, stalking also takes lots of other forms as well. And we really want to emphasize that it's that pattern of unwanted behavior. So that can be excessive unwanted text messages or phone calls. Maybe it's emailing or letters, all of those things. And it can also be unwanted gifts. So say someone's leaving unwanted gifts at your doorstep. You don't know who they're coming from. You don't know how they got your address, why they're leaving them there, how they know where you live. And all of these things can be really scary. So we just want to emphasize that stalking can take lots of different forms rather than the forms that are often seen in the media or in movies. And of all the forms of violence that we've gone over today, stalking is by far the most minimized. And that's often because of the language we use and the culture that we live in, and the jokes that we make. So we often hear in our culture the phrase social media stalking. So maybe you're being a little nosy and you're checking out somebody's profile on social media. It's really common for someone to say, oh, like I'm stalking this person on social media. But when we say things like that, we're really minimizing stalking for the harmful crime that it is. And stalking is really harmful for the survivors who experience it. And so by using that language so flippantly, it really makes a survivor feel as if what they experienced wasn't important. And we all know that it is. And so we just encourage y'all to make sure that we're not using these language. We're making these jokes and making light of how harmful stalking can be, just because we don't want to make a survivor question what they're experiencing. So if we continue to minimize stalking, when a survivor is experiencing stalking, they might not know it because these behaviors are so normalized. So this is why it's really important to watch our language and watch the jokes that we make. And then we do have a true or false for stalking as well. So the first statement says stalking cannot happen between partners. And this one is false. So one of the most common scenarios actually for stalking is either between current partners or between exes, so partners who have separated. And then our next one says stalking often escalates to verbal or physical violence. And this one is true. So about 73% of intimate partners verbally threatened victims with physical violence, and 46% reported being the victim of physical violence. So stalking often escalates into these other forms of abuse and violence that we've talked about today as well. And then only 10% of stalkers are serial stalkers or repeat offenders. And a serial stalker is somebody who stalks victim after victim. And as y'all can see, this one is false, and the percentage is actually higher. So it's about 33%, or 1 in 3 stalkers have stalked before. And then our last one says 3 in 4 people who have reported being stalked was by someone that they knew. And so this one is true. Stalking is often committed by someone that the survivor knows in some type of way, right? There's that relationship present, whether that's maybe they're friends, maybe there's someone that they share a class with, someone that they've seen on campus. So that doesn't mean that it has to be a very close or intimate relationship, but basically just knowing that person in some capacity.
I will note that it does say it's false on the slide, but disregard that, it is true.
And then lastly, all these forms lack consent, right? So all the different forms of violence and different abuses that we've talked about today involve that lack of consent. And in California, we have an affirmative consent law. And basically what that means is that consent can be given and revoked at any time. So say someone decides to participate in a sexual activity, but then they decide that they no longer want to continue. They have every right to take away that consent that they gave. And then also, what that means is that consent cannot be assumed from silence or the lack of resistance. So if someone doesn't verbally say no, or they don't fight back, that doesn't mean that they said yes. That's also a big misconception, which is why it's so important to highlight this today. And then the CARE office likes to define consent as active and enthusiastic participation. So just an easy way to think about it, if somebody is too drunk, if they're asleep, they're not active. And if someone is being coerced or made to do something that they don't want to do, they're not enthusiastic. And if someone's not active and if they're not enthusiastic, then you don't have consent. And if there's no consent, it is sexual violence, and sexual violence is very harmful to our community. And so I'm going to pass it back to Yasmin to talk about how our culture normalizes these forms of violences.
Great, thank you, Maddie. Yeah, so now that you are all agents of change, it's important to be aware of how you can be a conscious consumer and understand how sometimes our mainstream media and ads can contribute to rape culture. So let's look at this holiday advertisement for Bloomingdale's. Thinking about kind of what we went over today, we look at it and we see that it's an advertisement portraying a woman and a male, and she's looking away and he's looking at her, and it says, "Spike your best friend's eggnog when they're not looking." So this ad is glamorizing rape because, first of all, Bloomingdale's is a pretty high-end department store, and they're dressed in very classy, they're kind of dressed nice, like they're going out to a holiday party, right? And it's also normalizing it because, wow, like your best friend, not to only to add that majority of the time when a sexual assault or rape takes place, it is by someone that the survivor knows. So this ad is also feeding into that, you know, stereotype, not stereotype, excuse me, into that fact. And rape jokes. So this is also, excuse me, so this is also making a rape joke, which is minimizing the seriousness of the crime that does take place and that does cause harm to multiple people. So we don't want survivors to feel that what happened to them isn't going to be taken seriously because they see it in ads for department stores. So the next way that we're going to analyze how media normalizes violence is in movies. And so the most popular movie that of the summer was this one, and it's called 365 Days. And so this is a movie that portrays an extreme case of power and control. And so the media really ran with this movie and romanticized violence. So the plot of the movie is that this man sees this woman and he falls in love with her, right? 6 years later, he sees her again and he decides he wants to kidnap her. And he does, and she has 365 days, a year, to fall in love with him. And so it is very normalized within the media. As you can see, someone made a meme of a child sitting on a couch saying, "Me waiting for Massimo to kidnap me and tell me I have 365 days to fall in love with him." So this is romanticizing kidnapping someone and holding them against their will until they fall in love with you. So people were really wishing that they'd be kidnapped against their will. And movies like this affect our society and change what we think is acceptable, especially because this movie was so popular on TikTok, with different TikToks and memes. And that's a platform where a lot of young kids and young teenagers are exposed to. So do we really want them to be exposed to this kind of content that is giving them a normalized view of violence? So asking yourself that, it's important to know, how can I respond, right? So there are definitely different ways to intervene when you see something happening in person, or if you even witness something happening on social media, different ways you can intervene. So the first one would be direct. So this means to directly talking to the people involved, right? So this can either be asking the person that you think is being harmed, "Are you okay?" Or asking the person that you think is doing the harm, "Hey, like, what are you doing? You know, this person is obviously not comfortable." So as you can see, we have Taylor Swift from her very famous song, "You Belong With Me," saying like, "Hey, you okay?" So if you're not necessarily comfortable with being direct, you can be distracting, right? So this could be bringing up anything else as a distraction to diffuse the situation, whether it be telling someone that there's food, or, dancing awkwardly between people. As you can see, Jim Carrey saying, "You want some madness? Let's dance." It's pretty distracting if two people are arguing or a situation is getting tense. And the last, third way to respond would be to delegate. And this is when you get someone else involved to help you intervene. It can be an authoritative figure such as an RA or TA or even a police officer, or it could be a friend that can help intervene. So if you happen to intervene with nothing, like when nothing was actually happening, don't worry. The people involved will let you know that they're okay, and they may even appreciate that you took the time to check in. So I just found out my friend is a survivor. What can I do? It's especially important to know how to respond if a loved one is confiding in you in a sensitive and caring way. So the first thing you can do is believe them and listen patiently. Many people think that reported cases of sexual violence are lies. However, the FBI estimates that only 2 to 8% of reported sexual assaults are false reports. So if someone shares this sensitive information with you, just do your best to believe them and support them. The next one would be support your friend by referring them to campus and community resources. So I don't know. I know we talked about how Lena offers academic, housing, and legal accommodations. So if you need to move classes, if you need to move dorms, but that is not necessarily as big of an issue at right now. More of it would be if you need any legal assistance as well. She can help with restraining orders and protects their privacy. So they're confiding in you. So it's important to keep this information to yourself and not share it with anyone else. And remind them that it is not their fault. So because of victim blaming statements within our culture, someone who experiences sexual violence might be blaming themselves. So something as simple as saying, you didn't do anything or say anything to deserve this can prevent some of those feelings of self-blame. So, things to keep in mind if your friend is thinking of reporting to the police or getting an exam, these are really important things to keep in mind. So, forensic exams can be done only up to 10 days post-incident, and these are also known as rape kits. These can also be initiated by law enforcement or by going to the hospital. So a survivor can be named as Jane Doe for the exam and not press charges immediately. So if a survivor is uncertain whether they want to make a report, they can still go through the process of everything, and they might be still processing what has happened to them or figuring out whether they're ready to deal with this, with formally reporting and pressing charges. So they can leave themselves, their identity as a Jane or John Doe, leaving them anonymous. And to preserve evidence for an exam, advise your friend to not wash their mouth or body, and if they change, to place their clothes in a paper bag, because this preserves the evidence as plastic bag does not. And this does not mean that this evidence can be stored for up to 3 months. So it's important to make sure that it is stored correctly. Excuse me, the presentation has a mind of its own. Okay, so a survivor has the right to an advocate throughout the entire process. So during these 3 months, it is really important that a survivor does have a form of support. So if they would like an advocate, they have the access to that, as well do their loved ones too. Okay, so we're going to cover responsible employees. So it's important to know that any UCM employee who becomes aware of an incident while in their role as an employee, or they're told by someone who assumes that they're a UC employee in that moment, then they do have to report to Title IX or inform their supervisor. And this includes teaching assistants, residence assistants, student employees, and any staff member who is not a confidential resource. So, for example, a student working in the Lantern is told by their coworker that they don't want to go to work because someone has been making them uncomfortable and making explicit or harassing comments to them. So they have to report that now to Title IX or inform their supervisor, right? But the next day, that same student who works in the Lantern has a day off, and their best friend discloses something that happened to them over the weekend. They don't have to report that because they are not on the clock, therefore they're not fulfilling their role as a student employee at the time. So the Title IX office, as we just brought up, is the Office for Prevention of Harassment and Discrimination, and they conduct investigations and process complaints in regards to discrimination against protected classes, so race, gender, age, medical conditions, etc., and sexual harassment and sexual violence. So sexual assault, relationship and dating violence, and stalking. They also provide education and trainings about discrimination and sexual harassment, and they're also known to be the Equal Employment and Opportunity Office. So it's important to know how sexual violence impacts the FSL community. So according to the National Institute of Justice, sorority membership is actually considered a risk factor for sexual assault. Sexual assault and sexual violence happening or one of your members taking place in it can discredit an organization's reputation and all the hard work that you have grown to develop the morals and respect for your philanthropy and devotion to your org. So more than 1/3 of rapes reported on college campuses took place in a fraternity house. Male-age students 18 to 24 are 78% more likely than non-students of the same age to be a victim of rape or sexual assault. So it's important to take into account that sexual violence impacts everyone, regardless of your age, race, gender, but college is an area where the chances are very increased. And sexual violence can hurt an organization's devotion to their philanthropy. So how to create a caring culture. It's important to normalize a culture that doesn't allow for victim blaming statements. So if you hear someone saying it, don't be afraid to speak up or create that conversation as to why we shouldn't be having those statements being said. Validate those that speak up. Engage in conversations about affirmative consent, healthy relationships, and a culture of respect at chapter meetings. And calling in versus calling out as a way of practicing allyship. So if someone makes a mistake, enable them to grow from that mistake. Don't make them feel bad for it. Let them know, like, hey, there's a different way you can go about this. And lastly, think about the culture you are creating with social and philanthropy events. As a member of a Greek community, the reputation and the commitment that you have to your Greek org is important, and you definitely want to be able to implement what you learn into it. So we have a list of references. So our confidential resources, our Care Campus Advocate Lena, the Valley Crisis Center, CAPS, which is the Counseling and Psychological Services, and the Office of Ombuds. And then we have our reporting resources. So confidential is when you don't know if you want to report, so you are confiding in these resources with full confidence that it will be confidential. And then with reporting, it's different. So this is if you do want to make a report or file with an investigation. Also going back onto the confidential resources, just to elaborate that they do stay confidential on the certain, I'm forgetting the word. Maddie, may you help me? What word am I?
I'm not sure exactly what word you mean, but basically confidential resources are ones in which whatever you share is kept private. So that won't be shared with any other person. And then reporting resources are where typically a formal investigation is taking place, whether that's with UCPD or through Title IX.
Okay, thank you. And then, yeah, feel free to like us on social media. So we have an Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, YouTube, and TikTok. So thank you all for taking part of this, and I hope you enjoyed.
Thank you so much, everybody.